Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today I want to take you to February 1861. Abraham Lincoln has been elected president. He's yet to take the oath of office. He'll do that in a month. James Buchanan is the lame duck president. A number of southern states have seceded, and the country is no more a union. They have broken apart. No one knows what the future is going to hold. And so many people are filled with angst and worry, and violence is right around the corner. Meanwhile, in New York, in Buffalo, New York, the young man pictured here, William Barrow Mann, is worried about something quite different. He's taken his medical exams, his final exams, 22 years old, medical student, University of Buffalo. He's been working for 5 years to get his education and get to this moment. So, against the backdrop of the storm clouds of war, this angst-ridden young man is super concerned to find out whether or not he has passed his exams. So he writes a letter to one of his instructors, one of his favorite instructors, named Dr. Horace Clark, physician, helpful, the teacher that you've always wanted. Dr. Clark sends young man a letter back to try to relieve some of the stress, the suggestions of an older, experienced teacher to the pupil. And he says in this humorous vein, hey, I suppose if you are rejected, you will either fall in love, join the army, or blow your brains out. Trying to be funny, trying to lighten the mood a little bit. Well, Dr. Clark's reference evoked those storm clouds of war that was hanging over everyone's head, with South Carolina and now 6 other southern states having seceded, federal arsenals falling, and other military installations threatened. Mann, by getting his degree, wasn't quite sure what he was going to do with it. So he was excited about Abraham Lincoln being elected. Mann was a big supporter and was interested to see what was going to happen next. Mann eventually passes those exams. He had nothing to worry about, and he graduates with a medical degree. His plan, had the war not happened, was to go into private practice like many young men of his age and his training. However, while he's pondering and thinking about what he's going to do next, well, South Carolina soldiers moved first Fort Sumter, April 12th, 1861, the bombardment of Fort Sumter, and Mann, inspired with patriotism and a desire to serve his now broken country, decides to join the army. He immediately applies for a surgeon's certificate, looking for a commission from the state of New York Adjutant General's office. And he receives it on May 1st, 1861. That's really early on, just about 3 weeks into the war. But there's a rub here. Trying to find a regiment to serve proves a challenge. The Surgeon General of New York wrote to Mann on June 6th, over a month after he received his commission. Part of the letter reads, quote, "The volunteer force is, I believe, all supplied with surgeons. Unless a new call is made by the president, we shall not need more surgeons. You are not the only one disappointed, and it is very creditable to see with what alacrity and enthusiasm our young men present themselves." End quote. I don't think that those words, those soothing words, they were intended to make Mann feel better, but they didn't solve his problem of wanting to help the country. Undeterred, he applied to the Board of Naval Surgeons, which, as it turns out, were sorely in need of medical men. The board approved him. He went through the process, sailed through the process, and received his commission in September of 1861. His first assignment came soon after, a brand new gunboat, the Miami. It's a side wheel steamer equipped with rudders on the bow and on the stern, so on the front and the back. These vessels were known as double enders, and they were designed specifically to navigate narrow waterways without having to turn around. So it was sort of like having reverse and forward under steam power without even having to turn. Now, the Miami, with Mann now as its senior medical officer, participated in operations along the Mississippi River and its tributaries, where a double ender like the Miami was perfect. They are participating, or I should say, Mann and his crew and the Miami are participating in the siege of Vicksburg. And in late 1863, after the siege successfully ends in favor of the Union, the Miami is transferred from the Mississippi River to the Atlantic coast and was stationed along the sounds of North Carolina to enforce the Union blockade and prevent Confederate military activity. Again, a great location for a double ender to be, the sounds, those inland waterways along the coast of North Carolina. While all this is going on, the rebels respond in their own way. They begin constructing ironclad warships to take on the Miami and other vessels. The Miami, in fact, engaged one of these vessels, a ram, the Albemarle, during the Battle of Plymouth. This was before dawn on April 19th, 1864. The Miami and another ship, a wooden warship, the Southfield, were chained together to form one super powerful ship with extra firepower. The commander of the Miami, Charles W. Flusser, drove both ships straight at the Albemarle, going to take that ironclad ship on head on. The prow of the rebel ram, Albemarle, ripped into the Southfield, and she began to sink rapidly. This, of course, creating a really difficult situation for the Miami, who's chained to this now sinking ship. Meanwhile, the crew of the Miami is pouring shot and shell from its heavy guns into the Albemarle as she extricated her prow from the doomed Southfield. Captain Flusser personally fired the first 3 shots from one of the Miami's 9-inch Dahlgren guns. While that was going on, a fragment from the third shot, a 73.5-pound shell, rebounded harmlessly off the sloped side of the Albemarle, came back at the Miami and hit Flusser, killing him instantly. Mann, who is the senior physician, the head medical officer, there's nothing he can do. However, Mann did attend to 11 other officers and crew who were injured in the fight. The Miami withdrew from the scene along with some of the survivors of the Southfield. The Albemarle fired 2 final shots at the Miami, but did not pursue. It was more or less a drawn fight. Mann continued to serve in the Navy. It was less active than that fight with the Albemarle in April of 1864. He was in the Navy for another year until May of 1865, when the hostilities were over, his war was ended, and he returned to New York. Back close to Buffalo, he settled outside the city in the village of Brockport. Perhaps no surprise, the home of the instructor, Dr. Horace Clark, who sent those somewhat soothing, humorous words to Mann 4 years earlier. Mann, in fact, married Dr. Clark's daughter, Evelyn, and they started a family that grew to include 6 children. Dr. Mann resumed life. He entered into private practice just as he had planned before the war. He was known about town and to his patients as a friendly and lovable guy. He was widely trusted, completely respected by folks in Brockport. In fact, he became known later on as the grand old man of Brockport. That's after he retired in 1902. By this time, he was active in the Grand Army of the Republic, serving as surgeon of his local post. He had lasting memories of his Civil War experience. According to one report, his commission that happened to be signed by Abraham Lincoln and Gideon Welles, the Secretary of the Navy, and was delivered to him while he was at sea on the Miami. He kept that through his entire life, and it was one of his most treasured possessions. Mann lived a relatively long life. He died in 1920 at age 82. His passing was mourned by a large group of family, friends, and former patients. So there you have the story of Dr. Mann, the student who had some concerns about what he was going to do, how he was going to perform on his exams. He passed, only to skip out on private practice for war service, served honorably for the better part of 4 years, and then came home and resumed his life serving honorably his fellow citizens in Brockport, New York. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.